That was Ben Deneen with the Hillbilly Jam playing all instruments on that track. This is part 2 of the Physical Performance Show's summer series. Now it's summer down under, obviously in the Northern Hemisphere. It's not, but we're still bringing you the heat with some great learnings to set up your calendar year, the year of 2022, in the best way possible to help you perform at your physical best. Support for today's show comes from Polar, world leaders when it comes to multi-sport watches and heart rate monitors. In particular, if you are in the market for a new multi-sport GPS watch, look no further than the stunning Vantage V2. This is Polar's most formidable multi-sport triathlon running watch to date. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training and founder of Pogo Physio. And in this instalment, part 2 of the summer series, you'll enjoy some learnings from a repeat and much loved contributor to the Physical Performance Show, Australian-based world recovery expert, Associate Professor Shona Halson. Shona has been touted as the world's leading expert on athlete recovery. Shona was the director of the Australian Olympic Committee's Recovery Centre at the 2008, 2012 and 2016 Olympic Games. Dr Halson was the Senior Exercise Physiologist Recovery Scientist at the Australian Institute of Sport for 15 years and has in excess of 100 scientific papers to her name. Dr. Halson has consulted with some of the world's most loved and well-known brands, teams and organisations, including Nike. And today you'll enjoy some extracts from her September 2020 Livestream event, Recovery Essentials for Optimal Performance, whereby Dr. Halson delivered 4 modules during the Livestream: Fundamentals of Recovery, Recovery Periodization and Adaptation, Sleep Science, and Mythbusters. It was a very popular Livestream event, so get your pen and paper ready for some great learnings from some of Shona's sharings. And first up, Dr. Shona Halson outlines the mechanics of how we actually fall asleep and why it is that adolescent athletes struggle to get out of bed in the morning. You'll also hear Shona discuss why it is the time that the athlete must get up to attend an early morning training session that is more important than the time that the training actually starts. Enjoy.
First of all, the model, like the way that the process of sleep, and this is called the 2-process model. And there's essentially 2 things that go on to cause us to have this drive to sleep, which happens, peak, 9, 10, peak of sleepiness. So what happens is there's a homeostatic drive and there's a circadian drive. So the homeostatic drive is just how long you've been awake for. So the longer you've been awake for, the more drive to sleep you have. And that's why if we nap here somewhere in the afternoon, too long, too deep, too late in the day, it decreases that propensity or that drive to sleep. Interestingly, what happens when we've been awake for long periods of time, there's a chemical in the brain called adenosine and it builds up. And it's, you get to the end of the day and your adenosine builds up and you get sleepy. But if you have a nap, like I was saying, that can clear out some of the adenosine. The other thing, anyone who knows anything about caffeine knows that it acts on adenosine receptors, which is why it makes us feel awake, but not for long. So one of the things I always say is people are always trying to hack their sleep. And I'm like, if you're sleep deprived, the only thing that you can do to fix it is sleep. Caffeine might help you for a short period of time, but it doesn't solve the problem. The other thing that happens as we are awake during the day and then as we sleep is we have a circadian rhythm, and that's controlled by our body clock in the brain. So what happens is these 2 processes get closer and closer together here. We have a drive to sleep. We clear everything out of the brain. We get refreshed and then we start the day again. But what I want to talk to you about is there's things we do to mess up this homeostatic drive, like napping and sleep. And there are things we do to mess up our body clock. So you can see this is the brain here. Our eyes are attached through nerves to the brain, and light very much messes up our body clock. And we're pretty good at messing up our body clock with light through phones and computers. So we can mess up our body clock by waking up too early, alarm clock use, elite athletes, swimmers, rowers, triathletes, getting up really early when you should be sleeping still. Artificial light at night, as I said, SCN is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's our body clock. It's attached to the eyes. And so what we do is we get, and that suprachiasmatic nucleus, that body clock, is associated or linked to the pineal gland. And what's released from the pineal gland? Melatonin. So no surprise that when it's dark, we feel sleepy. When it's light, we don't. But as humans, we're pretty good at messing around with that and getting some light in the morning. Getting some light at night when we shouldn't have it. That's why light is the best way to adjust to jet lag, because light and dark tells you when you should be asleep and awake. So it can be really, really good for that. A lot of our peripheral clocks, our immune cells run on a peripheral clock, on our body clock. So what happens is, we mess up our body clock. We can have issues with our immune system. We can have issues with hormones. We can have all kinds of issues with our metabolism, with our brain in particular. So we do lots of things that influence this body clock in a negative way. Here he is again, Roger. Apparently sleeps 12 hours a night. Again, haven't seen any proof, but he's the poster child, right, for everything. So when we look, I could literally do 3 hours on why sleep is important, what parts of the body it affects. We're getting such good science on it because, sleep is just one of the most important aspects for our well-being. It's super important for the brain, memory, learning, decision-making, reaction time. If you're trying to teach someone something new and they're sleep deprived, really hard. If you want someone to remember what you've just taught them and they're sleep deprived, really hard. So having people nap after they've learnt something, after you've taught them something, getting people to make sure that they're, if you've got to do a hard session in the afternoon, example is NFL players, right? They watch hours and hours and hours of video a day. And these guys are just sleep deprived and they're knocking down the coffee to keep them awake. And I would question how much they take in because they're sleep deprived, because they have such early starts, because they have to watch so much video. And I understand that it's a very technical game and they need to watch video and they need to learn things. But doing that in a sleep deprived state, not easy. Mood, anxiety, depression, regulating our emotion, really important. We know that stressed and anxious people don't sleep well. We also know if you've got anxiety and depression, you're also less likely to sleep. You're also more prone, if you sleep poorly, you're more likely to have increased mood disturbance. So the direction is both ways. Talked about the immune system before. Body says, get sick. Let's help you. You need to sleep and recover. Lots of interesting things about metabolism, especially in kids. We're staying up later and later, so we've got more time to eat. But also it affects some of these hormones that tell us whether we're hungry or whether we're full, and maybe some evidence now around the gut microbiome. And, of course, when you're talking to professional team sport athletes, especially the men, about recovery and why they should sleep, when you start talking about testosterone and the positive effects and the release of some of these really important hormones during sleep, you kind of get some interest. Now, I'm glad you've got the slides, so I don't want to go through this into too much detail, but I want to say that we do have some information that if you sleep less or you sleep more, it can affect your performance. So it's not just, I'm coming in as mum telling the young kids that they really need to get some sleep. I give them some of the performance information. Now, some of the science talks about total sleep deprivation. That's just 24 hours of staying awake. Now, that research is interesting mechanistically, but we don't see that very often in athletes. Yes, they might stay awake 24 hours, but not before a major competition, typically. What we see more is shorter bouts of sleep restriction where you may be sleeping a few hours less each night. And then there's a little bit of research in sleep extension, not much. But what we know is that acute sleep restriction can have some effects, but not really. It's really where it gets chronic. It's really when you get more than 48 hours where you start to see an effect on performance. And sleep extension, you probably can't just increase your sleep by one night and think you're going to improve your performance. It's the chronic. It's where you've got an increase in the numbers of sleep for a reasonable amount of time where you see the good stuff happen. So there's evidence that if you sleep less, you perform poorer, and if you sleep more, you perform better. When it comes to why we perform poorer, it tends to be related to our perception of effort. So what we tend to see is that, your VO2 and your heart rate doesn't change after a few nights of sleeping bad. What changes is your perception of effort. Everything feels harder. Everything feels worse. Everyone knows what it's like to be horrendously sleep deprived and trying to stay awake and concentrate. So that's where some of the issues lie. But you've got that information there if you want to go through and have a look. We've collected data over the years in some of our best athletes. These are team sport athletes, Olympic athletes. And we see that individual sport athletes probably sleep about 6.5 hours of sleep a night of sleep, and team sport athletes about 7. Team sport athletes sleep probably a little more because we don't wake them up so early. We wake individual athletes up like swimmers, rowers and cyclists. In Australia anyway, we wake them up pretty early. So what we see is that athletes probably aren't sleeping as much as they should, and their quality is often a bit disturbed, and I'll talk about some reasons why. So if you look at the data, most of our athletes are getting between 6 and 7 hours. You have the odd ones here, which are under 4, and very few getting more than 9 hours. And typically that's under 4 is team sport athletes who struggle to sleep after a game. Or it might be we wake them up really early in the morning because we don't want to pay for an extra night accommodation, and maybe that's legitimate because we don't have the money. But instead of sending them the night before or the afternoon before, we send them in the morning and get them up at 3 a.m. for a 6 o'clock flight. So lots of things that can interfere with an athlete's sleep, lots of stuff. I've bolded the top 3, lack of attention or priority on sleep, social media, stress and anxiety. I'd say talking to athletes, these are the top 3 that I see. Caffeine also, yes, I do see that. Alcohol is not good for sleep, unfortunately, decreases quality. Time of competition, if you're an athlete that's competing at night, or sometimes athletes compete at different times because of TV scheduling, that can be a problem. Early morning training times just are not good for sleep. You just can't get the duration you need. Intensified training, we often think that, athletes get tired when they train intensely, but often their sleep is more fragmented. It's like a stress response. So we think, they sleep like babies because they're grumpy and they're tired, but tiredness and sleepiness don't mean the same thing. You can be absolutely bone dead exhausted, but not be sleepy. And so that's why you can get these exhausted athletes that you think are going to sleep well, but their sleep can be really quite fragmented in hard training blocks. I'll hear athletes say sometimes too, high intensity, really hard, high intensity interval session later on in the afternoon or, close to dinner time, struggle to sleep. Of course, if you're sore or injured, that can be problematic. Your chronotype, so if you're an early morning person, more often than not, we see the problems with the late evening people. And you can imagine, we don't see many night owls who are swimmers because that's probably their idea of hell, having to get up that early. We see most of our athletes are early morning or neutral types. We see not many night owls, especially in team sports. Especially in individual sports. Adolescence, the body clock shifts back in adolescence, so they become more like a night owl. So that's why it's hard to wake them up in the morning. Their drive to sleep is more like 2 in the morning to 10 in the morning. The body clock shifts back. And the interesting thing, they think that's because they're more susceptible to light. The body clock, as I said, light. And what do? Wow, let's give them phones and gaming and Fortnite and all kinds of stuff. So adolescence can be, and I think that's where we lose a lot of athletes in adolescence because everything's just, they're not adapting, they're not getting better, they're so exhausted because they've got school, they've got training, and it just all doesn't work together because their body clock is just shifted back. And so my advice always for coaches with adolescents, if you can, and you've got 1 session a day, make it an afternoon session, make it after school. They will be not ready to train first thing in the morning before school if you've got these young kids who are in adolescent phase and their body clock shifted. Athletes with kids can be problems. One of a team that I've been recently working with, I won't name who it is, but a female team, and the number of players who have dogs and cats and pets that sleep in their bed with them. And they're like, oh, yeah, the dog wakes me up. I'm like, yeah, it's probably not a good idea. Not my job to tell them that they can or can't, but just to say that, your sleep's getting disturbed by having pets in the bedroom and particularly in the bed. Jet lag, of course, when we can travel again, and just being in a foreign environment. First night effect, sharing rooms. Anyone who's been in Olympic Village, sharing two, there's usually 2 to a room, sometimes 3, little single beds, lots of athletes, lots of noise, not a great environment for getting good sleep. Effective early training schedule. So this is looking at a range, again, a whole stack of athletes. And we looked at whether the start of the first training session was between 5 and 6 in the morning or between 6 and 7 in the morning. And you can see that if they're starting training between 5 and 6 in the morning, they're getting less than 5 hours of sleep. And that's because, I often think the important thing is not the time that the athlete has to start training. The important thing is the time that they have to wake up. If they have to travel, if they have to eat, there's all kinds of things that an athlete may need to do before they actually get to training. And so if we've got these ridiculous early training times, it's just hard to get the duration, especially if you're training in the evening or you've got study or you've got work, then it can become a real problem.
You're listening to Associate Professor Shona Halson, extracts from 2020's Recovery Essentials for Optimal Performance live stream. Support for today's show comes from Polar. The team at Polar want to wish everyone a very happy new year and a great start to your pursuit of your physical best in 2022. Polar have the experience, insight, and history of quality design and innovation which is unparalleled, worn by some of the planet's best athletes. If you're feeling like you need to get back and beat your best, then it may be time to upgrade your multi-sport GPS watch. You can check out the incredible features of Polar's multi-sport watches like Polar Flow, Training Load Pro, Run and Bike Tests, so you can nail your VO2 max and power training alongside nightly recharge and Recovery Load Pro features by jumping over to polar.com. Polar's unique features are designed to help you absorb and make the most of your training and come back even stronger. And who doesn't want that in 2022? So check out Polar's brand new Military Grid X Pro, one of the toughest watches out there, built from military grade sapphire glass with ultra long battery, alongside the new Vantage V2 and my personal favourite, the Vantage V2 Shift, one of the lightest and most formidable multi-sport watches on the market. So jump over to polar.com and come back stronger in 2022 with your new GPS watch.
One of my previous PhD students, John Paul Kaya, he was integrated in with the Brisbane Broncos, so he did a lot of sleep work with them and did this cool study where did monitoring and education on sleep for 2 weeks. And their sleep at the end, they were better. They were getting more sleep and they were doing all the right things. Checked again a month later and they were back to where they started. And this is where I talk about consistent and persistent messaging. And there's a few sort of rules of behaviour change, and one of them is you can't appeal to people's common sense. Education, it helps, but it's not going to make all the difference. We need to think about their environment. We need to think about how we make things stick, how we make our messages stick, and how we repeat our information to make this make things happen. And I'm sure plenty of you have read this book, Nudge, and Richard Thaler gets some criticism for some of his thoughts around behaviour change, but as a general book in terms of learning, for me, learning about behaviour change as a first book, it was a pretty good one, because I remember, and this is probably one of my biggest myths, is when I first started, I did my undergraduate and spent a bit of time working with chronic fatigue syndrome, and because I was fascinated by fatigue. And then I found that a challenge. And then when I started working with athletes and got to the AIS, I was like, as a naive 20-something-year-old, I was like, oh, how exciting. I can't believe I get to work with athletes who are just going to be so motivated and just tick every box and do everything that we want them to do. You learn over time that is not the case. And I think people still think that. I still think, and obviously there are athletes that I've, had the pleasure of working with who just tick every box and they are disciplined and they do everything. But there's plenty out there that don't. And so for me, learning about sleep and going, okay, now I know how to fix it. See, I know how to fix it, but I can't get people to do it. And it's like everything, we're well educated about exercise and we're well educated about diet. And I think the stats are, we are continuing, not just Australia, but every other country not every other country, but many countries, to be more overweight than ever before. So we know we've got the education, we've got the knowledge, but putting things into practice and actually making change is hard. So I started reading Nudge. Richard Thaler's the guy, he's in The Big Short with Len Gomez. He actually won a Nobel Prize 2 years ago, 2018. As his area is economics. So he uses behaviour change and he looks at economics. He worked very closely with Barack Obama to try and look at behaviour change. So he's pretty smart. And he was, in his book, this is the classic, this is when people say, how do you, change your environment to get people to make change? This is the example in his book and I love it. So this is apparently the urinal in the men's toilet in Amsterdam in Schiphol Airport, and apparently by putting the fly decal in there, people tended to aim at the fly and it decreased their requirements for cleaning by over 80%. So that's what we call nudging. Changing the environment, putting things in place to change the environment. It's like when you go to the shops and all the lollies are standing there at the aisle. That's their environment has been set up to make you make choices, and probably choices that we shouldn't be making in some instances. So this sort of got me thinking. I'm like, okay, well, what can we do from a recovery and sleep world to change the environment, to change the way that we do things? And again, this is one of the quotes from the book. It says, customers are busy, lazy, often confused. They are surprisingly likely to take whatever option is made the default. And I changed that to athletes. Often busy, lazy, confused, and they're just going to take the easy option or the simplest option. And so when you look at nudging, it's about incentives. So how do we incentivize things? And it doesn't have to be monetary, obviously. What are incentives for doing the right thing? Understanding mappings, and that's to do with the environment and certain things, which I'll get onto. Defaults. We're so the example in the book again is if you get a new piece of software that you have to put on your computer. It says, would you like to do this manually or would you like the default? We just click default. Like I know I do, because I think I'm less likely to get it wrong. We need to give feedback. When we're doing Assoc sleep reports, we need to give feedback. We also need to expect error. We can't expect that when we want people to change something that they'll do it immediately, and that they'll get it right. And we need to help them make complex choices, because that can be problematic. So that's essentially what nudges are. So, can we nudge in sport? And it got me thinking about, sleep and recovery and because, and like I said, people have all the equipment, people have the knowledge, like how do we get them to do things? So again, we're profoundly influenced by social norms. Humans are the best nudgers of other humans. So when you're working with athletes, having a leadership team or having someone, as an example, to be a nudger of other people. Some of the one team that I did some work with, they had the lead. I basically instructed the leadership team, but they did, two of the key leadership players did the sleep education. And they came across way better than me doing it, because the players actually listened and they were really good examples of doing the right things. Can we establish defaults and harness inertia? So people are more likely to do what they've always done. And if there's some good things in there, how do we harness that? And how do we get people to make good their default? What incentives? Thinking people don't think about the long-term benefit, they think about the immediate cost. How do we get athletes to think about a 10-year career versus, I get to party and I get to have a good time, I'm going to watch Netflix tonight? And humans are generally loss averse. So, and an example I often use is people are excited to make it be selected on a team, but in comparison, they're much less happy when they're not selected. So we're loss averse. We don't want to lose. And so creating competition can be good. So how do we set up our environment? And a really good example that I like around sleep is the bedtime alarm. We set up a morning alarm, but how about setting a bedtime alarm so that if we're on Netflix or we're on whatever, we get an alert to say it's time to go to bed. And it also makes you think, okay, if I need to get up at 7 because I'm a swimmer and I want to get 8 hours, I need to be asleep by 11. Not in bed, I need to be asleep by 11. So it helps you do those simple calculations. And it's funny because I stopped asking athletes how many hours of sleep they get. I ask them what time they go to bed and what time they wake up. One, it gives you routine, but also, it's easy to say 8 hours. It's harder to calculate and go, oh, yeah, I went to bed at 10 and, yeah, I woke up. Yeah, because sometimes they say they've slept 8 hours and they definitely haven't. So bed and wake time, much better than just asking duration. And then how do we educate? What I think is effective is to have simple information in places that cannot be ignored. If you're in the gym, you've got TV screens with a couple of simple dot points on sleep near the stationary bikes. Having education in places that people are going to be able to see and not ignore. And the language that we use. So people often say, sleep is really important, and it is. But what about get more sleep? Using the word more, because everyone can get more. Sleep loss can reduce performance. This is this loss averse thing. So, we don't want to reduce our performance. And there's things, behaviour change wheels that can be interesting. So priorities, what do the athletes, I talked about that. What is their motivation to be the best that they can be? Is their motivation to win Olympic gold medal? Is the motivation to I just want to be picked on the team and I want the tracksuit? What excuses do you make? Does the athlete make? Oh, I just could not possibly go to bed before 10:30 because I'm just not tired. You fall asleep in 0 minutes. When your head hits the pillow, you could fall asleep, trust me. But they make excuses, and often it's good to ask other people what they see. Learn. So the thing is, we can tell an athlete that they need to, so you need to meditate. Just say that's an example. But can they? Do they know how? That's not good enough on its own. We need to give them the strategies. Okay, here's an app. This is what you do. I need you to do it 20 minutes a day. Ideally do it before sleep. But if you can't, put it in at 2:00 in the afternoon. We've got to give them some structure and some guidelines on how to do things. And so there's the thing that one of the little myth busters for me around when I first started working in sleep, I couldn't believe some of the questions I was getting. I wake up 5 times during the night. Is that normal? I nap for, 3 hours starting at 6:00 in the afternoon. Is that okay? And things that we think are no-brainers or really straightforward may not be for other people. And so I think it's important that we appreciate that. And for me, it's about advising small changes. If I go to an athlete and say, right, you need to start doing a recovery 5 days a week, or you need to go to bed at least an hour and a half earlier every night, and be like, nah, you've lost them. It's not going to happen. Whereas if you say, tonight, I want you to go to bed 15 minutes early, and for this entire week, 15 minutes early than you normally would. I'm like, yeah, that's achievable. They think, I can do that. And then when they can do it, they feel a sense of success and they're more likely to continue. acting. So the doing is the hardest bit. So providing feedback, expecting them to make mistakes. And then the thing is, so they're starting to go to bed 15 minutes early. Okay, let's move to the next stage. Let's begin a new challenge. Let's keep improving. And so I think if you take a bit of a strategic sort of look at trying to get, rather than just saying, you need to do this because it's good for you, we need to think about how to move through this process for people to actually do it. And the thing that I always found, my first sort of example was I was trying to do sleep. We're working with the swimmers. We were doing sleep monitoring. We were doing heaps of stuff and couldn't really get any traction, or they were into the monitoring, but only just. And, and then Michael Phelps, I think he started working with Under Armour, and he had a sleep monitor and a mattress or something, and started coming out saying how important sleep is. And then all of a sudden, swimmers were asking me questions about sleep and, what's this sleep monitor? And can I wear it? And is it different to the one that I've got? And so sometimes you just need that person out there, that person of influence to make some changes.
Today's episode is brought to you by Precision Fuel and Hydration, who have a range of tools and products to help you personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so that you can perform at your best. Long-time listeners of the Physical Performance Show will know Precision Hydration, but they've changed their name to reflect the fact that they've been helping athletes nail both aspects of their performance for a long time now. Everyone sweats differently, and the amount of fuel we require varies depending on factors like the duration and intensity of our activity. So a one-size-fits-all approach to fueling and hydration just doesn't cut it. Head to precisionfuelandhydration.com and use their free online sweat test and quick carb calculator to understand your fluid, electrolyte, and carbohydrate needs during training and racing. Then book a free one-to-one video consultation with the team to refine your hydration and fueling strategy for your next race. As a listener of the show, you can receive 15% off your first order of fueling and hydration products by using the code capital TPPS22 at the checkout at precisionfuelandhydration.com. That's TPPS22 at precisionfuelandhydration.com. Support for today's show also comes from AMP Human. AMP Human and Momentous, building the future of human performance. AMP Human, the creators of PR Lotion and Momentous, the cleanest, safest sports nutrition company, are merging together to build the future of human performance. PR Lotion is designed to maximize your training and recovery by unlocking bicarb, a natural electrolyte that improves muscle function and helps you combat fatigue during hard workouts. PR Lotion is used by some of the world's greatest endurance athletes, including Lucy Charles-Barclay, current World 70.3 Ironman triathlon champion, and Ineos Grenadier professional cyclist Cameron Worth. Train, compete, repeat with AMP Human PR Lotion. The AMP Human team have generously offered up 25% off when you buy your AMP Human PR Lotion from the AMP Human brand store over at bikeexchange.com. Simply use the coupon code TPPS25 at checkout. That's TPPS25. Get your hands on AMP Human's PR Lotion. This show simply would not be possible without our show partners and sponsors, so thank you Polar, Precision Hydration and AMP Human for making this summer series possible. So there you have it, our summer series, part 2 episode, Your Recovery with Associate Professor Shona Halson. I hope there's a few learnings you can apply and musings you can ponder as you look to improve your physical best performance in 2022. Now, if you'd like to get access to Shona Halson's live stream event, Recovery Essentials for Optimal Performance, you can jump over to physicalperformanceshow.com, and there you can get access to the complete live stream recordings now on demand from $49 per person, or of course, consider becoming a Physical Performance Show Learnings member over at Patreon. Just search the Physical Performance Show, and there you can pledge your support from just $5 per month. And in return, we'll grant you complimentary access to our back catalogue and all upcoming live stream events. As always, thanks to the great team who make this show possible: Daryl Misson, audio engineer, Susan Wilkins, show administration, and Matthew Olding, graphic design. Now, coming up on next week's episode, it is part 3 of our summer series, and you'll enjoy extracts from UK-based leading sports dietitian and author Rinny McGregor, who in 2021 presented a wonderful live stream fueling the endurance athlete. So have your pen and paper ready for next week's episode. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show Summer Series.